Hi, I'm Chinlu.
And I'm Sal, and this is our next make.
Last week we showed you our plans to transform this bedroom into a multi-purpose space. So we started by tackling the Murphy bed.
It turns out that building a Murphy bed requires you to work with a lot of plywood, and that can be challenging. A full sheet of 3/4 inch plywood weighs more than 60 pounds, and its shape can make it very awkward to work with. Having a second set of hands certainly makes this easier, but there are also a few tools and techniques that can help too. When you're breaking down large sheets of plywood, you can do anything from drawing a line and freehanding it with your circular saw, or using a dedicated track saw. But there are a few low-cost alternatives to getting high-quality cuts. A set of infeed support legs can help you cut full sheets of plywood on the table saw. I made ours after watching a video from Jay Bates. There's a link to his video below. The supports work great, but it can still be tricky to keep the plywood tight to the fence, especially as the weight of the sheet increases. A great alternative is to lay the plywood on the floor, on top of some foam or wood scraps, and clamp a straight edge in place to act as a fence. With this approach, you just have to remember to offset your measurement by the distance between the saw blade and the side of the shoe that you'll run up against the fence. Or you can make a simple track for your circular saw like this one, using scraps of plywood. I made this track for my corded circular saw years ago, and I can place the shoe on either side of the fence and get perfect cuts. It's worked so well that I want to make another track for my smaller battery-powered saw. The construction is very simple. It's made up of two 4-foot pieces of 1/2 inch plywood. The only thing we have to worry about is how wide to make each piece. The width of the track needs to be at least as wide as the overall width of the saw. And you can get that measurement very quickly by setting the saw on its motor and measuring from the table to the top of the shoe. That's because part of the width is taken up by the shoe on this side and the other part on this side. And we want to make sure there's enough room for the motor to clear any clamps you'll use to hold the track in place. I'll measure my smaller saw and then rip the plywood to be slightly wider than that number. We'll use the saw to perfectly trim it later. Then I'll rip a narrow piece that's at least as wide as the motor's overhang. I'll lay out for a few screws and then pre-drill with a countersinking bit before gluing and screwing everything together. What's great here is that I don't have to be too precise with the glue up. I just make sure I attach the fence so there's enough material on one side for the wide half of the shoe. Then I can make a cut on each side to trim the track to the perfect width and get each edge parallel to the fence. I love projects like these that turn scraps into useful tools, and these sleds are a perfect addition to any shop to help you break down large sheets of plywood. We used a variety of these techniques when breaking down the 4 sheets of 3/4 inch plywood for the Murphy bed. To cover up the edges of plywood, you can either attach a thicker piece of solid wood or a piece of edge banding veneer. Veneers come with either a peel and stick backing or a heat-activated adhesive like this one.
It's pretty straightforward to attach these, but we use a few techniques to get great results. The first thing we do is use a bit of tape to hold the banding in place. Then we turn on the iron up to a medium-high setting, turn off the steam, and slowly work our way along the edge, applying a bit of pressure. We keep the iron flat until we know we've got good adhesion, but before we stop, we tip the iron over on its side ever so slightly and run it over both the edges to make sure we get a great bond at those vulnerable spots. We don't even mind if we hear a bit of cracking along the edge band overhang. It kind of lets us know we're really forming a crisp edge. We trim off the excess with a utility knife and just make sure we don't dig into the plywood veneer in the process. You could buy a dedicated edge band trimming tool to help with this, but we find that a sharp blade works great. If you look closely at the edge banding, you may still see the thickness of the adhesive, which makes the result less appealing. What we'd like to do is use the shaft of our favorite screwdriver to burnish the edge of the banding and then chase it with a light sanding with 400 grit paper. This really helps give the impression that the plywood is a solid board. We use this technique to apply edge banding to all the visible edges in the Murphy bed build.
Working with plywood is something you're bound to do at some point on your making journey, and we hope that what you learned in this video helps you get great results on your next project.
We still have a bit more to do to finish up the Murphy bed, and we can't wait to show you the final result. So continue to follow along as we build out the space.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you on our next make.
So difficult.
This is why we can't get work done quickly.